This paper that I've written seeks to address how we look at the environment. Are we looking at it just strictly biological or just strictly from a cultural perspective? This paper aims to take both those ideas and merge them together. Why is it that we can spend so much money on Medicare and military and housing and education, the things that are for the people to help them prosper and to continue living in our society, yet spend so little on energy and the environment and on the sciences, when all these things need to work in harmony for people to live and sustain in this world. Human beings live in the kingdom of nature and interact with it constantly. The way that this happens is through glasses, metaphorical glasses. So you're either looking through these lenses of the glasses from a biological way or from a cultural way. This paper wants the reader to look at how we interact with our environment through both a biological and a cultural way. When we're defining or looking at how biological and cultural lenses affect how we as a people look at the environment, we need to understand what those two words mean. So, when the paper talks about biological, it is looking at whether or not um, you are born here in the U.S., if you were born in a different country, what area in the U.S. you were born in, um, what gender you identify with. Those are all biological things. Those are things that are beyond your control, things that are set. If you're born to one group or another, whether you're Native American born, African American born, if you're Caucasian or of European descent, those biological things that come along with that, those traits, hair color, things like that. So when you think about biological, that's what we're talking about. When we're looking at um, cultural, we're looking at within those groups, within those structures, what are the beliefs? What are those social aspects that are grown from that group that you reside in? So we're talking at rituals. We're talking about specific and certain linguistics, language, how you're speaking with one another. Um, those are the things that you look at, that this paper looked at as far as cultural, and then taking into account the different places that cultural and biological take place within that realm. Three groups that I looked at in my paper were Native Americans, African Americans, and Caucasian European Americans. And I found an article that let me look at the three different groups at the same time and kind of get a broad take on their relationship to the environment. And it was very clear and easy to see that both the biological and the cultural aspects of all three of these different um, groups of people meshed together. That there was these overlapping of who looks at one area one way and who deals with one area another way. Who sees promise and who sees destruction, who sees growth and who sees um, uh, desolation or hindrance. In 2014, the Journal of Environmental Economics and Policy Studies said that there is not enough documentation of how culture influences attitudes when it comes to the environment. And that doesn't mean that culture plays a small role, it just means that the conversation hasn't been changed and adapted enough to include culture. We speak a lot about the biology of dealing with the environment of specific places and the people living there, but we don't really focus on the fact of the people living there and how they culturally interact with the environment. Um, and that's the basis of the paper is that we're missing that important segment of the conversation that leads to change because we're not including that information. And that's why it's so important to look at biology and culture as we're talking about the environment. And that's where there's a disconnect, but it's also a place where we can become connected. If we change the conversation to include culture along with biology, then we have a better means and a better way to really get at the heart and to really make it poignant and important for the group that we're speaking to. So, for anybody that's seen Tomorrowland by Brad Bird, um, you know that it's a movie that kind of does these flashbacks and flash forwards and things of the past that really happen in the future. It's about these two worlds kind of coinciding. You got this world of the brightest and smartest and most creative people coming together and being brought out of their present time to live and be and to grow their minds. Um, but as they're growing their minds, they're really helping to create this utopian world. And it's an idea that was a Walt Disney fantasy. It's something that he really wanted, that he really dreamed of. It was this whole idea of people really coming together and making the world better. Um, and it's that idea of people being brought together and not being molded into a specific shape, but taking what they have and their talents and using it and putting it next to and with other people and their ideas and their talents and their skills to create this utopian society. Now, that's something that we're missing here in the US to some extent. And it's because there's this notion, this idea that we are this large melting pot, and we're really not a large melting pot. We are, and I'm not the first to say it, we are like a salad. A melting pot is really when you think about say chocolate. Say you're gonna make some kind of chocolate confection, and you've got dark chocolate, milk chocolate, white chocolate, which isn't really well, isn't really chocolate. Um, you have all these different chocolates. You got different places that chocolates come from, and you're like, I'm gonna make something really grand, and you put them all in a pot, and you start to melt it down and cook it, and what you're end up with is a big pot of chocolate. And everything that was unique and special about each individual piece is gone now because it's been melted to create something understandably delicious and good, but everybody loses their individuality. But when you think about a salad, you have your base, whatever that is, and for me, that's our biological. The base is we are humans, we are people. You know, we we have our genders, whatever those identifications may be, but we're there. We're all together. So we have our base. Now within that biological base, we have our culture. So we've got our tomatoes, our onions, our chickpeas, our sunflower seeds, whatever that thing may be, we have those and we're putting that inside and on top of our base and we're creating something new, but we're also keeping our individuality. And even within that, all those things mixed together, making something amazing, something grand. And that's where Tomorrow's Land's ideas kind of merge with this paper's ideas because if we're talking about combining and looking at biology and culture as we're talking to people about the environment, then we need to understand that we need to look at them as if it was a salad. So, how would you talk to a tomato? How would you talk to a cucumber? And your tomato language can't be the same as a cucumber because you make a cucumber mad, he turns into a pickle. Reading through an article by Thomas Silver called Three Worlds, Three Views: Culture and Environmental Change in the Colonial South, Nature Transformed. It gives you kind of a breakdown of Native Americans, African Americans, and European Americans, or those coming into the New World. And it gives you kind of how each group saw themselves in conjunction to the environment. And it's this piece that really kind of summed up and helped to solidify the actions needed to get to each group in a manner that makes sense. Um, in looking at dealing and talking with Native Americans and the environment, it really was about having conversation with them where their ideas and their hopes and their practices are honored and justified, and really building upon what they're already doing, but really having that be a larger thing where it's not just something that is put off, but building upon that within their community, and then understanding that this is a joint effort and that the conversation will, in their case, be centered on the things that they're doing and their history and what's worked and what hasn't worked, and how they see um, their future with the environment. When you're speaking to an African American community, and African American, Native American, and European American, they are by far not the only cultures here in the U.S., but for time's sake, just focused on those three main groups. And speaking with African American community, um, everyone knows the history of African Americans and being brought to this land and kind of losing their connection with their biological homeland and being brought into a place that wasn't their own, and for a very short amount of time having a feeling that it could be and then having that taken away, and so not really having a permanence. Um, but also knowing that from history that some of the things that were looked at by European Americans as far as the environment as not worthy or wild, having African Americans look at that, or Africans at that time, and later on, looking at that same place of wilderness and seeing the possibilities for the future. And so, really having a conversation with the African American community as far as the possibilities, what kind of legacy, what kind of environmental inheritance do they want to leave to their family, and really bringing that as the main focus point, because of the history and because of families kind of being torn apart, and really saying this is something that will be for generations, and putting all your hopes and your dreams into that as um, their ancestors did prior. Sadly, looking at what, or from this my perspective, um, as Mr. Silver was writing, how he um, brought about the idea of European Americans, and kind of this what was best and what was better was how much money you had or how much wealth you had, and really acquiring more. And so that's kind of some of the problems with our environmental talk right now, because it's not being presented in a way that a lot of Caucasian or European descendants here in America, born in America, they're Americans, um, view as poignant. Now, this is by far not the case for everyone in any of these cultural statements. Um, but if we're talking about government, which a large portion of the government does happen to be um, European Americans or Caucasians, um, is really setting about a what's the bottom line? How will this affect other financial avenues? How will this benefit um, them, and how does it hinder them? So, really, once again, tailoring the conversation to each group that you're with. All of the resources and papers and movies that were used and talked about in the paper really brought it to the point of um, taking and tailoring the conversation so that it speaks to the audience. And in order to do that, you really had to focus on the biology of your audience, but also the culture of your audience, and making sure that you're not forgetting either of those when you're having these conversations about the environment. If you try to stay with the cookie cutter way of talking, then you have lost a large chunk of the possibility of what can be changed in our environment. There's people out there in different communities that have ideas that don't feel as though their ideas will be listened to because the conversation has never been brought to them in a poignant way. And that is because it's been lacking. Um, and so that was the findings of my paper, is that the conversation is lacking in biological and